Good morning, everybody. I was very much hoping to be with you in person this morning and had every plan to do so. And in fact, my daughter has been taken very ill, and so I'm having to stay home to look after her. And I'm taking the time that I would have been spending driving to the conference, recording this for you so that I can be with you at least in some form. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for this opportunity and to all those who have helped to produce this conference. It's a pleasure to be able to join you at least on screen. And I can see from the programme that a very broad range of topics will be discussed today. From what I know of sustainability and from what I've read about David Middleton, this is all entirely appropriate. All areas of work and life must transition rapidly to sustainable practices. And David himself was nothing if not eclectic in his interests while being single-minded in his commitment. I'm going to bring into focus here a topic that has huge potential power to support sustainability in every area of life, but which sadly gets far too little attention in the sustainability discussions. The title of my speech is a bit of a giveaway, of course. I'm talking about the law. We have been led to understand over the last decade or two that the biggest challenge humanity has ever faced, that of climate and ecological breakdown, is ultimately a question of consumer and lifestyle choices. The planet is warming, forests are being denuded, the air is toxic to breathe, and every corner of the planet is contaminated with plastic because of our everyday decisions in the supermarket or at the used car lot. Now, I would be the first to say that we need to vote with our wallets, and consumer power is vitally important. But the stark reality is that the vast majority of people in the UK, let alone the world, simply cannot afford to make the right lifestyle choices. And when it comes down to it, are they really choices? If I walk into a supermarket and everything is covered in plastic or has been flown in from halfway around the world, did I choose that? If I drive an old banger, which I do and would have to come and see you, by the way, there are no millions to be made in global legal advocacy, I can tell you. Did I choose that over a Tesla? Of course not. The options available to me are limited and decided at the highest levels of government and industry in terms of policy, production regulation, subsidies, and so on, not by me as a citizen. So how are we to reach those highest levels of decision-making to influence things in the right direction, the direction of sustainability? By looking at policy and regulation, and yes, ultimately by looking at criminal law. Why criminal law? Because the levels of environmental destruction that the planet is suffering on a daily basis are not held in check by regulation as it stands. And that is in large part due to our cultural mindset. We have spent centuries developing an attitude of alienation from nature. In the dominant Western paradigm, we think of nature as something separate to ourselves, like a bank of resources. And there is a way in which that is inevitably the case. We must breathe, eat, drink, shelter, and clothe ourselves. But it is as if we've forgotten that we cannot do any of these things without healthy ecosystems and without balance. We have no sense of taboo around the massive destruction of nature, or as it is increasingly becoming known, ecocide. And it is becoming increasingly clear that we should have such a taboo. And as criminal law is in our culture what we use to draw the moral red lines, criminalizing ecocide can be of huge help here. Our organisation, Stop Ecocide International, works globally to develop cross-sector support for an international crime of ecocide, to sit alongside genocide and crimes against humanity at the International Criminal Court. These days, we find ourselves at the heart of a rapidly growing movement. From a standing start just a few short years ago, discussion of ecocide law is now on public record in at least 24 of the International Criminal Court's member states. And in this last year, we've also seen the business world waking up to the value of this initiative. Now, at this point, I was going to wave at the screen behind me, which presumably is now the screen on which you're watching this, to refer to the consensus legal definition of ecocide, which emerged last year from an independent panel convened by our charitable foundation. It was a group of 12 top legal experts from around the world with a variety of legal backgrounds, expertise, and ideologies. Well, if this were a Zoom, I could share it on my screen, or if this were a prepared piece, I would have asked our video editor to pop it in right now. But as I'm improvising in the living room, I'm simply going to show it to you like this. Now, there is a further paragraph which defines the key terms, but the core definition, as you can see, is so concise that it fits on the back of a business card, which, in all honesty, is a huge bonus if you're dealing with busy politicians. And the definition is simply this, the core of it. Ecocide means unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. It's a straightforward and powerful definition and has rapidly become the de facto starting point for diplomatic and political, as well as legal and academic discussion on the subject around the world. And there are a few aspects to this definition which it is briefly worth highlighting. Firstly, it's phrased as a crime of endangerment. It's the acts which threaten the likely harm that constitute the crime, rather than the harm itself. And this is super important with environmental damage, since we don't want to wait until half the world is destroyed and then work our way back to find who did it. We want that pause for thought to happen before the danger is incurred. Secondly, the threat must be of severe damage. We're not talking about chopping down trees on the village green here. And you'll note that there is no list of prohibited acts, but instead a threshold of potential consequences. Now, this keeps the definition future-proof and flexible based on the first principles of preventing a certain level of harm. Thirdly, acts must be unlawful or wanton. Now, this additional threshold acknowledges that much environmental harm is already illegal. For example, a huge percentage of deforestation in the Amazon is already illegal. But it's poorly enforced. And so this strengthens existing bodies of law that may vary from country to country. And then the wanton aspect covers cases where activity may be permitted, but if the threatened harm is disproportionately severe, it would still be covered by the definition. So all in all, a very practical, balanced, and intuitively clear definition. And there is another advantage to it. Put this in the hands of anyone who knows their own sector, and immediately you are stimulating questions. You are providing a lens through which people can look to ask, what does my sector need to do in the light of this approaching law? And this is really where the gold lies. Now, there is a growing frustration around the world, and I can tell you it's being felt at all levels, from street protests to the boardrooms of sustainable businesses to the conference halls of the UN. It's a frustration with lack of action, with a kind of political and industrial inertia, one might say. We know how drastic the situation is out there in the world. We know why. We even know in many ways what needs to be done. And there are many wonderful initiatives struggling uphill to do it. And some of those solutions will be discussed over the course of today, I'm sure. But it is all moving too slowly. It's desperately frustrating, and meantime, the planet's vital ecosystems continue to be assaulted in so many ways. We would contend that this is in large part because the right legal parameters are not in place. Now, I used to be an entrepreneur before I got into this work, and I know that if you want to unleash real creativity and innovation, what you need more than anything is a clear set of parameters. When you know what your constraints are, you can get creative. Crucially, it makes you start asking the right questions. And because the human brain is the marvel that it is, that is when you start finding answers. So the power of this law to prevent ecocide lies not only in the prosecutions that might be taken once it's in place, although those, of course, will have an impact, no doubt. It lies in what becomes possible when people can see it coming. Now, the UN Race to Zero initiative recently recognized this in their report, which is called the Pivot Point, which acknowledges that voluntary action on climate, while laudable and essential, is not moving fast enough to create the transition we need, and that policy and regulation must be called for. The report dedicates a whole section on ecocide law as a key driver and influencer of change. We would add that it will stimulate investment in new regenerative business models, level the playing field for those already leading, as many of you are, in sustainable enterprise. And it will also stabilize operational and reputational risk. Now, that's a considerable list of carrots coming from an area of law normally perceived to be made up of sticks. So, in conclusion, it seems that there are moments when the collective consciousness of society becomes aware enough of a legal gap or need that it is possible to enact laws to address that gap. In turn, the laws adopted gradually transform the moral thinking of society. I believe we're living through such a moment right now, and that while ecocide law cannot, of course, fix everything, there are no silver bullets. It does constitute precisely this kind of a legal and moral turning point. We know the coming decades are going to involve some rough sailing. We need to be honest that we've already created too much damage to be able to avoid that completely. But if we are going to make it through to a world that is sustainable, or better still, one that is thriving, then we must put in place the essential legal framework to protect life. And in doing so, we make it so much easier for all our business decisions and policy decisions to flow in the right direction. Because finance, money is like water. It flows where it's allowed to flow. So when we put the right borders in place to prevent it from flowing in destructive directions, we automatically start creating a virtuous cycle instead of a vicious one, to have things flow in a positive direction and galvanize true positive strategic change. And that's what I believe the focus will be over the course of today, on that strategic positive change. And I hope that this brief intervention has enabled you to see how criminal law parameters could assist very strongly in that task. Thanks ever so much, and have a fantastic day.